Three, two, one, here we go. RAINMAN'S Take podcast. Observations on the world we live in. My take on current events and other topics of interest. Also, interviews with some really cool people. So let's get the conversation going. Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man. I want to welcome back my guest, Jerry Hendrix. For most of you who know, this is Jerry's third time on the program. He's an amazing guest and a wealth of knowledge on the subject matter that we're going to be talking about today. But before I get into that, I'd like to thank you for being part of Rain Man's Take. If you are new to the program, welcome. I know you're going to enjoy the content. So if you could, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right-hand corner of your screen and go ahead and watch this video to the end. That'll help me with the YouTube algorithm, which in turn will help get this word out to more people and continue the conversation going. So with that being said, again, I want to welcome my guest and friend, Jerry Hendrix. Jerry, how you doing today?
I'm doing really good, actually. I've been looking forward to this conversation to kind of come back and re-engage with you and your audience. I've really appreciated the way that you conduct your interviews and then also the feedback that follows from this. So it's great to be here with Rain Man's Take.
Perfect. Great. Well, welcome aboard. Just as a refresher for everybody out there, Jerry is a retired Navy captain, and he's a current senior fellow at the Sagamore Institute in Washington, D.C. He regularly consults with the DoD and the Navy in particular, and has authored several books and articles, one of which we're going to be discussing today. And the name of this article, which he wrote for The Atlantic, is called "The Age of American Naval Dominance is Over." And if that sounds a little bit sobering, the article is, but it gives us the reality of where we stand today. So, Jerry, welcome back. And why don't we go ahead? Why don't we just start with a little bit about the article, how it came about, why you wrote it, and what's been happening since then.
All right. Well, thanks. That's a great setup. So I started to write this article over a year ago. I wanted to approach the Atlantic magazine because one of the problems with being a navalist is we generally are caught preaching to the choir. We talk to other navalists, we talk to military strategy people. And so, for a number of years, I was either publishing in the Naval Institute's Proceedings, which is sort of the common journal for the naval profession, or since my retirement, I'd kind of branched out and spoken out through the National Interest or National Review. But the fact is those are really, you're speaking to the center right in those situations, to the realist community or the conservative community. And the challenge that we have today is that national defense, we have to get beyond that. You have to get to the center left and to the left of this conversation if you really want to move the needle. I mean, one of the big problems we have today is we're only spending like 3.2% of GDP on defense. Entitlements is eating up more and more of the budget, and tax revenues are remaining flat in terms of overall percentage of GDP. So if you're going to make an argument that you want to grow the defense budget or you want to rejigger the way that you spend your defense dollars, then you got to talk to that broader audience. So I approached the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, made my pitch. And one of the things I told him is like, first of all, it's called the Atlantic. It's literally one of the world's oceans. That's the sort of the focus. And in the beginning, the Atlantic had a big focus on maritime. I mean, Alfred Thayer Mahan published one of his first essays in the Atlantic, I think in December or January of 1890. Theodore Roosevelt reviewed Mahan's book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, in the Atlantic, and Roosevelt was a frequent contributor there, as were other navalists of that age. So I kind of made that pitch. I also pointed out that the Atlantic really hadn't gotten in depth on the maritime environment for almost 10, 15 years. I went back to a Bob Kaplan essay and said, I think that's the last time I've seen it in your pages. And so he said, "Hey, bring it. Give me this outline." So I gave it to him. He hooked me up with one of his associate editors. They then lined me up with a final editor. They really helped me to refine and sharpen my arguments. And in the end, the essay even got longer. I went from 3,700 words to 5,200 words
Oh,
because
wow.
they kept
Okay.
asking me, "Well, explain that. What do you mean by naval presence? What do you mean by this?" Anyways, great people to work with. And then it hits the pages in April of earlier this year, and boom, the feedback I got from so many people left, right, and
Yeah.
center that were reading it on Capitol Hill, around New York, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, really much more impact than anything I'd written previously. Even my books did not get out as much as this essay got out. But the key thing is I made a couple of key predictions within the essay. One was, hey, imagine that globalized trade starts to break down. And
Yeah.
I highlighted in there the fact of the Ever Given, which is a large container ship getting jammed in the Suez Canal, and said, imagine if that happens, but on a larger scale. Well, flash forward, another 9 months, and then the Houthis start to take out shipping in the Red Sea.
Right.
And suddenly
Right.
everyone's starting to reroute away from the Suez Canal. By the way, this follows, and again, it's like we didn't even notice. One of the things I said in the essay is that the ocean has become assumed. We just assume that free trade, free navigation exists and it's going to happen. We assume that it's always happened and it's always going to happen. Well, and neither one of those is true. Historically, the oceans have been contested for the vast majority of human history. They will be contested again, and we're moving into that era now. So I wanted to highlight that, but then it happened. The Houthi shipping, we started rerouting, and then I just remind your listeners and your viewers that, hey, the Black Sea got shut down 2 years ago, and so the Dardanelles have largely been compromised on grain shipments and oil shipments and some of the things that come out of the Black Sea. So if you step back and you think, Rayman, about the Mediterranean being sort of the motherboard of the global network, the way that we process trade and trade flows around the world, two major nodes of the motherboard are down right now. Only the Strait of Gibraltar, or the Strog, as we military guys would like to call it. Only the Strog is operating the way it's supposed to, which means it's getting loaded up with extra
Wow.
tasking on it, which means that
Yeah.
node is beginning to come under strain. By the way, the Panama Canal is under strain right now due to some bad engineering designs made by the Panamanians. So we're seeing more and more things go around the Cape of Good Hope, around South Africa, and around the Strait of Magellan, around South America. And this is adding cost and time. So we are actually seeing in real time the global trade network begin to fray.
And what I find fascinating about this is, in both of our lifetimes, the United States Navy has been the dominant force around the globe, and everybody, even if they're just casual observers of it, Top Gun, all these things. We got 13 aircraft, nuclear powered aircraft carriers. Some countries don't even have any. It just was assumed, like you said, that the United States was going to be there to kind of keep everything flowing. And I think right now, not only are we seeing that start to start our influence start to diminish, but you start to get the other contenders out there. The Chinese are starting to increase. What's going on in the South China Sea? We've discussed that in the past. So it's an end of a kind of like we're watching the beginning of the end of an era, and that to me is very disheartening to see. But like you said, it wasn't always a given. So maybe we're reverting back to a mean, that there's going to be some period of chaos before things maybe settle down a little bit more. What in your view is how are we going to see this? How are we going to see this play out for the regular person? Is it because all of our cost of goods are going to go up or delayed, or there won't be a supply chain? Where do you see sort of this going?
Well, I think you're going to see in the short term, first, we're already seeing inflationary pressures come in. The cost of our goods are rising. And I think that's going to continue. We're also seeing some economic manifestations, some phenomenon as we reshore or friendshore some of the critical goods. Like, we're all now making an economic bet that Taiwan is not a safe investment for us any longer. So we're really concerned about TSMC and our dependence upon microchips coming out of Taiwan and what it
Right.
would mean if China moves against Taiwan, because right now we don't have a good track record with regard to defending our interest overseas. So starting with the pullout of Afghanistan in 2021, which was a debacle, and then mishandling the situation ramping up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine just over 2 years ago, 2 years, 2 months ago, when we really just kind of fumbled that. Probably looking at the way that we've handled our southern border, which sends a gentle, actually a shouting signal to the world about how seriously we take, issues of national security. And right now, I think we're moving towards a crisis. Well, and even right now, the way that we are somewhat shilly-shallying around with regard to our support for Israel after the October 7th massacre, where we're trying to bring pressure to bear against the Israelis based upon the means by which they are pursuing Hamas, a terrorist group. So I think that we're sending signal after signal after signal. And this is one of the things in a paper that I authored that actually came out in October of last year, where I looked at the value of naval presence. Guys like you and I, we talk about naval presence, that when we send ships around the world, we're sending our presence, we're demonstrating our interest in something. Well, the
Right.
value of that presence has actually been in decline because of two factors. One, the size of the fleet has come down, so we're not able to be as present, but also the sense of the combat credibility of that fleet, and for that matter, national will. So I guess there's three things. National will has been in decline. People are looking at us and saying, you guys used to be pretty trigger happy. We were afraid to go up
Yeah.
against you because you were large, strong, and we knew that you'd whoop up on us. And right now, the question is I don't think you're going to whoop up on me. I think I'm going to be able to get away with this. So that's what Ukraine said. That's what Ukraine demonstrated, is that, hey, we're not going to come there and back up our promises. And before
Yeah.
anyone in the audience comes back and says, well, Ukraine was not an ally, you're right. It's not a formal ally. But we made them a promise when they gave up their nuclear weapons that their security would be guaranteed. And we were one of the guarantors of that security. By the way, the other one was Russia. So we all knew that Russia was going to be a bunch of liars. But
Yeah.
Ukraine was counting on us to guarantee their security when we asked them to give up their nukes. So whether they're an ally or not, we gave them a promise and we haven't held up to that. So right now, our combat credibility is down. The sense of our national will, our national resolve is down. So I think we've created this vacuum, and I'm really quite concerned about what that means for like this year, because I think there's a chance that China moves against Taiwan this year. We're in the midst of the Davidson window, and you and I have talked about Davidson window before. We're right in the
Right.
middle of it right now, and now is Xi Jinping's moment, and I think he's going to move.
Well, and that's on one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, and this might just be me kind of going off on the current administration and the current administration's priorities, but ever since this current administration took over, you see a complete disregard for battle ready a battle ready military. I mean, and you're seeing it now with the horrible recruiting numbers that are coming in, and then of the people that are going into the military, it's almost like they're turning the military into a social experiment, and that's all playing out while, like you said, China is starting to flex its muscles in the South China Sea. So I guess a good question would be, from a military perspective or a readiness perspective, is can we turn this can we literally turn this ship around? What would it take to do that, or are we too far down the road?
Well, so I'm not sure that we can turn the ship around. I think we can alter course about, 30 degrees port or starboard to kind of start changing the course. But the idea of actually changing the ship around, you know, we're caught up in a confluence of events right now. And you are correct in that, we're sort of zigzagging back and forth between political parties and their approach to defense. If you remember, when Trump came in 2017, his promise was he was going to rebuild the military, um, but he didn't. And there's a reason why he didn't, because he went out and he hired General Mattis to be Secretary of Defense. And as much as I love and respect and revere Mattis, Mattis came in with the perspective of a 4-star, and he said, "Hey, I've got a hollowing force here, and if I get an extra dollar, I'm going to spend it on maintenance and readiness." And so Mattis tried to take every extra dollar he got from the Congress and sort of fill the holes that he saw in the force. So for the first 2.5 years of the Trump administration, we didn't build anything, but we did fill in a bunch of readiness holes. Well, then Mattis left, and then we went through about 3 acting secretaries, and then we got Mark Esper. Mark Esper came from being Secretary of Army, and he kind of thought he was hired to kind of continue what he was doing with the Army, but he didn't pay a lot of attention to the Marine Corps or the Air Force or the Navy,
Yeah.
and so they sort of lacked for attention. And so finally, in Trump's last month in office, we had a pronouncement that Trump wanted to build to a 440 ship Navy, and he wanted to strengthen the Marine Corps. But he was already defeated and on his way out of office when they announced that. And so, great. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for the vote of confidence on the way out. Since Biden has come in, we've seen sort of a reversion to a norm with the Democrat Party. And I'm going to say this as objectively as I can, because I try to stay out of the woke aspect of this. But ever since the Truman administration, the Democrat Party has seen the military in many ways as a laboratory for social experimentation. And that has been both good and bad. And I want to make sure that I'm objective to that. So the Truman's decision to desegregate the armed forces was a quantifiable good for us. But we've also gone on with these conversations about the role of women, where we've tried to figure out whether they're going to be in line in combat units or in support. And we've gone back and forth on that. And then most recently, we had the, Clinton with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I actually came out as a critic of that. And I said, don't ask, don't tell, don't work. Because the point that is that, you can't walk around lying about the nature of your people and just ignoring their personal lives. I remember when I was squadron command, I had a couple in my squadron, 2 women, and one of them got sick, and I wasn't supposed to legally be able to go and help that family because I couldn't recognize the fact that they were partners and in a relationship, and because that would have outed one of them. So I was glad that we
Right.
finally did away with that. But right now, the Biden administration seems to be in full embrace of a number of different agendas, and it's caused a lot of confusion and cultural clash within the military. And what we're seeing, and I'm trying to say this just as objectively as possible, is that traditional recruiting areas of the military, and in the Navy, that is in the Midwest and Plain States. We recruit largely from there. The Army recruits largely from the South, from the 11 states of the former Confederacy. And in those regions, military service is a family tradition and or a family business.
Yeah.
We are actually seeing something right now that I have never seen in my lifetime, and I'm 58, which is you're having adults my age, previous veterans, who are going to younger members of their family and recommending not going into the military. And this is
Amazing.
causing a crisis in military recruiting. So the Army right now is 24,000 people short of its enlistment goals. The Army is actually restructuring itself now at the division and battalion and brigade level to recognize the fact that it will not be as large as it wants to be, as large as the Congress authorized it to be. It cannot recruit the people to get in and do that. The Air Force and the Navy are also having that. By the way, the only service not having an issue is the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps will tell you it's because they've never changed their agenda. They are recruiting warriors who are ready to fight and win the nation's wars. They don't offer you free college education. They don't promise you goodies here or goodies there. The only thing they promise you is, I'm going to train you to be ready to fight, and you're probably going to sometime during your enlistment.
Yeah.
And for some
Yeah.
reason, the knuckle draggers love to go and do that stuff. So boom, the Marine Corps fills its coffers every year and has not missed a recruitment goal. So,
Interesting.
and so I'd say it's the least of the social experimental of the services. So we're
Yeah.
seeing all this happening, and it is causing a crisis across the military right now, because if we can't get the people in, then we're going to have to change the force structure anyway.
Yeah, and so you kind of combine that with, and when you were talking about under Trump and his desire to increase the ships in the Navy, I know that for a time during when you were at the Center for New American Security, I believe you spoke in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee about Trump's original plan to get the Navy to 350, and then of course it almost sounds now like it was a throwaway comment. I want to bump it up to over 400. Obviously, he articulated that, but for some reason it didn't happen. And is that just because there wasn't the appetite, there wasn't the political will to put more money into something that everyone just kind of assumed was good to go, the Navy?
So, if we look back at it as a lesson learned, and you look at, so the last time we got a significant bump in, and I'm going to use the Navy because it's what I know. But if you think about the Reagan administration and the 600 ship Navy, which, was
Right.
40 years ago now. And, I know there's a lot of people, it's like, hey, got to get over Reagan, he's dead. No, but you have to go back and say, why did it work? Well, why it worked is that for 4 years between the Ford administration leaving office in January of 77 and then Reagan coming in January of 81, this guy, John Lehman, went off and created a plan for how he wanted to rebuild the Navy. He was in his 30s and he worked on this assiduously for 4 years. And when it came time and Reagan was in, Lehman wrote the defense plank for the 1980 Republican National Convention, and the Navy was a big part of that plan. And then they went and they tried to buy off John Lehman by offering him a bunch of other jobs in the government, including Deputy Secretary of State under Al Haig. And Lehman said, no, no, no. The only job I want is Secretary of the Navy. And then he got to be Secretary of the Navy. He waited everybody else out and he got the SecNav job. And then he came in with a plan. And then he was aided, and this is something that, like, historically, it's kind of interesting. He was aided by the fact that his brother was on the national security staff in Reagan's White House. And so every time that Cap Weinberger wanted to kneecap John Lehman and say, you got to share the wealth, we got to grow all the forces equally, I love all my services equally, all my children are the same, John would be able to call Chris, and Chris would be able to get something in Reagan's in basket. And then Reagan would go to the rostrum and he would make an announcement endorsing John Lehman's plan to grow the Navy. And suddenly Cap Weinberger had his knees cut out from under him at that point in time. And so it was an alignment between the president of the United States, who had a vision of a larger and stronger Navy as part of his Cold War strategy, and a secretary who would carry it out. And they were able to go around the Secretary of Defense's office in a way that no one had been able to do since the SecDef office was created in 47. So today, what was missing with Trump? Well, Trump had, some guys in the as Secretary of Navy who were interested in growing the force, but they had to deal with the Secretary of Defense, and then they had to deal with a president who was so consumed in defending himself against these charges of Russiagate and all the other things that I think Trump really genuinely sort of lost the bubble on the idea of growing the military or growing the Navy in the way that I think he was committed to. He didn't get the bubble back until very late in his administration, when he brought in Robert O'Brien to be the national security advisor. And the moment that O'Brien got into the West Wing of the White House, the Navy started to come up in Trump's conversations, because O'Brien is a committed navalist. So as we look at the formation or the potential of a new Trump administration, you watch very closely where O'Brien goes. Now, I fear that he'll go to State Department and be Secretary of State, because, that's kind of Robert's background and bailiwick. My prayer is that he would go and be Secretary of Defense, and so that we would have that strong alignment between the president and SecDef, and they would get a
Yeah.
strong Secretary of the Navy, and then they would drive and grow. But we'll just have to see. But you have to have that alignment of the leadership, everyone having a common vision,
Yeah.
common strategy. We haven't had that in a very long time.
And that actually, right before you mentioned Trump, I was going to ask you about that. It looks like obviously it's him and Biden for president in the fall. Are you hearing around the water cooler about who some of his staff and secretaries and who some of the key people potentially could be, and are they people? Because obviously, I'm assuming he learned his lesson from his first administration, and how difficult it is to kind of maneuver through Washington. The hope is that he aligns himself and puts people around him that they'll be able to maneuver better this time around. But are you seeing people that maybe there's interest in having part of that administration? And are you seeing, okay, these guys are definitely pro Navy and pro building up the strength of the Navy?
So yes and no. So the list of people, first of all, I think Trump, unless he gets a blowout in the Senate, like unless he can add 6 seats in the Senate, Trump's going to have a problem getting people through the Senate. When he comes in. Now, the good news is I think there's a chance of picking up 3 or 4 seats pretty well in the Senate right now, but it's going to have to be a major movement, a wave, in order for him to get if he can get 55 seats in the Senate, then we're in a better position. So some of the crazier names, like the dyed-in-the-wool committed MAGA Trumpists that some people get kicked around to be Secretary of Defense, I don't think that those names go through either for SecDef or for DepSecDef or whatever, because the one thing that everyone now knows is that once Trump gets somebody in, he will use the Vacancies Act to start moving them around where he needs them. Once they're confirmed at a certain executive level under the
Gotcha.
Vacancies Act, he can move them around. And so I think there's going to be a lot more scrutiny about Trump appointments. But let's think about the ones that he can get. So Mike Pompeo can be reconfirmed by the Senate, on his worst day, because he was a great director of Central Intelligence. He was a strong Secretary of State. I think that Pompeo has a good probability of going to defense and sort of doing the George Marshall of his age, because George Marshall held both Sec State and SecDef after leaving as Army Chief of Staff. So that could be something. Robert O'Brien, I already mentioned. O'Brien's largely considered to be a good, strong player. John Ratcliffe, the former director of national intelligence, former congressman, chairman of the Intel Committee, he's got a lot of support on Capitol Hill, and he's considered to be a serious guy. I think Ratcliffe easily comes back into play someplace that requires Senate confirmation. But what I expect to see is that you're going to see a lot of senators in safe seats or former senators who have strong national security or economic background are going to get named, because this is like one of the traditions of Washington that I think Trump's going to go to. And I think he's being advised to go to it now. So one of the rules is that if you're a senator or a former senator, you get senatorial privilege, and the Senate passes you through as a grant of privilege, because each one of them wants to preserve that privilege for them and their party in the future as well. There's only been one senator who's been denied a cabinet level seat, and that was John Tower in the Bush 41 administration, because his colleagues happened to know that Tower was an alcoholic. And they didn't want him as Secretary of Defense because they were a little afraid at what time of the day that they might get the satchel brought to him for the nuclear codes. And if John was 3 sheets to the wind, they didn't want him to have the job. So Tower got shot down, but that's the only one. Wow. Everyone else, if you're a senator or a former senator, you get the grace of getting passed. So I think you'll see, I would just say like Tom Cotton, safe seat, Arkansas, Republican governor, Republican state. Tom Cotton could be appointed to any seat, including Attorney General, and I think he would take it. So I think you'll see a lot of those types of solutions in a Trump administration.
And now on the flip side of that, what happens if the Democrats take control or still have control of the White House, and then Congress, where does this go? Does it get, how much worse does it get?
Well, I think that first of all, you're going to see a large turnover between a
Okay.
first Biden term and a second Biden term. So I don't think that Lloyd Austin continues and goes 8 years as Secretary of Defense. I think that we'll see the first woman Secretary of Defense as Kathleen Hicks gets elevated from Deputy Secretary of Defense up to Secretary of Defense. And for those of us who know and have worked with Kath Hicks in the past, she is a serious practitioner and thinker. I disagree with her on a number of policy issues, but I do not doubt her credentials or her work ethics. I will tell you also, she is a Navy brat. Her father was a 2-star submarine admiral. And a really great personality and a strong leader within the Navy community. So I would expect Hicks to go, and I would expect to see a lot of chair movement as people fleet up from assistant secretary to undersecretary, and some unders go home, cash out, get into business or back into think tanks. But you will see that there will be significant movement amongst cabinet level positions in a second Biden term. I would also expect to see, Jake Sullivan perhaps slide over from National Security Advisor to Sec State to replace Blinken to kind of continue those things. None of that really is appealing to me because I disagreed with them on so much, but I think that's the way it will go. There's a lot of loyalty within the Biden team.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, excuse me. Obviously, watching it from the outside, not knowing any of these people, or the lack of leadership from that cabinet just is mind blowing to me. And you see it on the world stage, kind of almost everywhere they go. And so, to me personally, that would be extremely frustrating if we continued seeing the same people kind of work in the same issues and not really anything changing. A couple of things I wanted to kind of bounce back on. You'd mentioned it earlier about the several nodes around the world that are currently being compromised, Black Sea, the Red Sea. And then you also mentioned Panama. The Panama Canal has some issues now. Is that primarily, because weren't the Chinese deeply involved in the restructuring and the refinancing of the whole Panama Canal expansion program? Weren't they heavy into that?
Well, actually, this predated the China.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So the Panamanians, almost as soon as they got a hold of the canal in the Carter administration, they began to plan that they wanted to expand the size of the locks because they wanted to increase the size of the ships that could pass through the locks because a lot of the shipping fleet had grown beyond what we call the Panamax, the maximum size of a ship that could pass through the canal. So they wanted to grow to be able to absorb more and thus have more income. Well, here's the thing. So, we're going to put on our historian's hat here. And I will tell you, the Army Corps of Engineers, when they designed the Panama Canal, they really did their homework. So they understood what the century of averages were for rainfall in Panama, in Central America. So, the entire Panama Canal is freshwater fed. Except for the 2 outer sections that actually touch the ocean. The rest of it, those locks are raised and lower with fresh water out of a series of lakes that dot through Panama. Yeah. And so it's completely dependent upon rainfall to be able to handle moving ships through the Panama Canal. Well, when they grew the size of those locks, that increased the amount of fresh water that was required to be able to move those ships. Well, so what happens if you get outside of that average of rainfall? What if you go beyond the limit of what the rainfall can support and you draw those lakes down? Well, that's what's happened now. So we are actually restricting the number of ships that can pass through the Panama Canal. We are also restricting the draft of the ships. So they can't be fully loaded out because we're not able to pump as much water in. So this is really a management issue with the Panama Canal Commission, as well as the Chinese who are managing it now, that they've overused it and they went to a new design that the lake system is not able to support. And because, by the way, they're
Wow.
not able to flush those locks as much as they were in the past with fresh water, silt is beginning to build up in the locks. That is going to be a long-term maintenance issue because at some point in time, someone's got to go in there and clean that. And they don't have
Mm,
enough fresh water to flush it. So by moving away from the original design that, let's face it, was designed during Theodore Roosevelt's administration and
yeah. Yeah.
getting greedy, now they've kind of screwed themselves in the long term.
And I'm sure the shipbuilders out there in the world are not building boats the same size. They're increasing the size of the ship. So what happens? Does that become obsolete? And then they have to go back around South America?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. So you either
Wow.
have to go around South America, or oddly enough, the sacred and long desired Northwest Passage, moving through the Canadian Arctic waters, because of changes in seasonal temperatures up there and the size of the icebreaker fleet, we are able to now make some transits for a period of time, 30 to 60 days a year, through the Northwest Passage, or for that matter, the Great Northern Route across the north of Russia, across the Arctic Sea. So we're going either south or we're going north, and we're going with increasingly large ships. Rainman, I'll tell you, there's called a China Max ship, which is a 400,000 ton ship that is used to carry ore from South America to Chinese ports. That is 4 times the size of American supercarrier. But we're building
That
ships
is
that large, and that that
unbelievable.
ship will that ship will never go through Suez. It will never go through
Yeah.
Panama. It's made to go from the western shore, a coast of South America, over to China, and that's it. That's its job, to take stuff that far.
Wow. That
Yeah.
is, I can't even imagine the size of that thing.
There's
Unbelievable.
only 25 ports in the world where it can call, because you got to be able to take 55 feet of draft, and most ports are not carved with that much depth under the keel
Yeah.
when you go pier side to load these things. So I mean, shipping. I mean, I think this is another part of the essay that in the Atlantic I wanted to bring. You can't get you can't grasp. Most people don't think about how much more efficient shipping by sea is over shipping by air or rail or truck. It is pennies on the dollar of shipping any other way. It is the most cost efficient method of
Hmm.
moving a huge amount of cargo from one place to another across the planet. So shipping is really it's the secret sauce of why your globalized economy, why we've seen the rise of human lifespans and the quality of life across the last 100 years. It's about shipping, and yet we took it for granted, and now it's kind of getting away
Yeah.
from us.
And you also mentioned this in the article. And again, whoever is interested in it, the article that we're referring to, it's titled "The Age of American Naval Dominance is Over," and it's from the Atlantic, and I believe it was written in March of last year. Um, well, I wanted to bring this up because you bring it up in the article, and that is, as U.S. naval influence starts to wane around the world, then potentially the shipping lanes become a little bit more unprotected, a little bit more kind of like you're going out into the wild. And then now you potentially could see the increase in piracy. And that's what you see in the Red Sea a lot. When ships go around the Horn of Africa, the Somali pirates, the Houthis, and what they're doing in the Red Sea right now. Um, and maybe you can explain this to me, because not being in the Navy, not necessarily understanding maritime rules and maritime law, why couldn't a shipping company, let's say Maersk, who's got well, they're yeah, let's just use them as an example. Anytime they go through a contested area where piracy is known to happen and it's common, why not put an armed security on that ship just for that certain period of time as they're transiting that area? Is there something that says they're not allowed to do that?
So if you do that, you increase risk of lawsuit against the shipping company. So every shipping company has a insurance policy against that ship, and the insurers, the most famous is Lloyd's of London. The insurers kind of look askance at that idea that you're going to put armed people on that. Have they been properly trained? Are you
Hmm.
liable if they go and kill somebody? What happens if something goes wrong? What if there's an accident on board and there's an accidental discharge and one of your crew are killed as part
Oh,
of this?
yeah.
We're not sure that your policy will cover you under those circumstances. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why there has not been a formal declaration of war by the United States since World War II, is because the insurance policies that are written against businesses to include defense businesses, many of those
Interesting.
insurance policies become null and void under wartime conditions. And so many of these companies do not want to take that risk. And so they actively lobby the Congress, and the insurance companies actively lobby the Congress.
To
Whatever
not
you do,
to
do
not
not
declare war.
declare war, because
Wow.
then the entire insurance industry, effectively everything that we have is the basis of risk, economically in the country, it gets pushed out the window in a time of war.
Interesting. Wow. I did not know that. I did not know that. That's amazing. Um, Again, you're starting to see the rise of sort of China, especially in the Pacific and the South China Sea, the rise of their influence there. And kind of getting back again to the premise of the article, and that is a waning naval presence or intimidating naval presence by the U.S. through our shipping lanes is going to promote challengers to kind of step up and sort of start to flex their muscles. Has it happened yet where China actually flat out threatens, hey, you better watch the ships going through, I don't know, the Straits of Malacca, or something like that? Have they come out and actually said something like that, or would that be akin to a declaration of war?
So they are saying a lot of things. They are not doing a lot of things.
Gotcha.
So right now they are saying things to us like, you better stop moving through the South China Sea and the Taiwan, or else. And they're sort of issuing these
Hmm.
verbal demarches to us. They're not doing to U.S. Navy ships yet what, for instance, they're doing to ships of the Philippines, who are trying to go out and resupply their military detachments out and around the island chain near Scarborough Shoals and some of the other places. There was an incident just in the last, I want to say 3 days, where one of
Yep.
the
Yep.
Chinese Coast Guard vessels came out with water cannons and started to try and flood one of these Philippine ships out there. And then there was a near ramming between a
Exactly. Yeah.
Chinese Coast Guard vessel and a Philippine Coast Guard vessel. So I've actively predicted. In fact, I'm late, meaning that I predicted it would happen by now. But I predicted in my book a couple of years ago that I think that the Chinese are going to come out and do a shouldering episode where they're going to come alongside one of our ships and come alongside it and go skin to skin and then push us out of the way as a
Wow.
demonstration that, hey, we're top dog in this area. And the reason why
Yeah.
I say that is I noted they have a new cruiser that's they've just built. And the design of the cruiser is particular, or seems to be designed specifically for shouldering. So its tonnage is greater than our Arleigh Burke class destroyers and our Ticonderoga class cruisers. And at sea, the law of gross tonnage rules. Whoever's the
Yeah.
biggest, gets to stand on, and the he who is
Right.
smallest has to give way. So I think that their 11,000 ton cruiser will come alongside our 9,500 ton destroyer and start moving us out of the way. By the way, we did this with the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War. There was a famous incident in the Black Sea where they came out with one of their ships and shouldered one of our ships to try and move it out of what they claimed as their water space. We didn't recognize their water space. I think the Chinese are going to do this. I'm surprised they haven't done it yet, but I do think that's coming.
And do you think that that's what tips off a shooting war, or is there still a chance for diplomacy after something like that happens?
So there's always a chance of diplomacy with Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken in office. Um, so one of the reasons why I'm particularly concerned that China will move sooner rather than later, like late this summer, early fall, is first of all, they've laid in huge stockpiles of soybeans and meat and other key supplies for their economy. They've bought up, like 2 years worth of supplies of soybeans off the global
Mm.
market, and it's in storage. Same thing with meat. Pork in particular has been freeze dried and shipped to China. So it's clear that
So they're
they're banking
anticipating.
on something.
Wow. Okay.
Sanctions. They're anticipating sanctions. So,
Gotcha.
but the other thing is do they dare risk a Trump administration being in office when they finally decide that now is my time to go? Because the one
Right.
thing I can say about Donald Trump is the man is utterly unpredictable. I don't know, and I cannot predict how he's going to respond to any particular crisis. By the way, two other presidents who had this same reputation, Reagan and Eisenhower.
Mhm. Yep.
Eisenhower threatened to use nukes because of what was happening to the French at Dien Bien Phu. He threatened to use nukes when China was shelling the offshore islands off of Taiwan of Quemoy and Matsu early in his
Right.
administration. And no one wanted to roll the dice with the guy who had landed the troops at Normandy. It's like, that dude took a 24-hour window and he invaded Europe. Okay, so we're not going toe to toe. And Reagan had a sense of irresponsibility about him, the way that he was colorized by the left globally, that he was a cowboy. And so when Reagan joked, we begin bombing in 5 minutes, the Soviet Union went to like DEFCON 1 because they just didn't know what that dude was going to do. Well, Trump's got that sort of reputation for a little wildness and irresponsibility. So do you think that Xi Jinping waits for Trump to be in office on January 20th, or does he go this fall when he knows he'll have 6 months to negotiate with Biden and the Biden team, so he can invade Taiwan, and then we can begin consolidating his position over the next 5 months, get as much done as he can before Trump shows up? Because if he doesn't, let's face it, Xi is 71 years old. So he's not getting any younger either. We're dealing with all these 70, 80-year-old, men in senior leadership positions, and the clock is ticking. It's a real thing with them. They all know how much time they got left, and it ain't much. So they're all in a hurry to get done what they got to get done.
So one of the things that worries me, everybody knows this, that I'm a huge Trump fan and cannot stand the Biden administration. And my view going forward to November, the election, is unless something really radical happens, like it did in before the 2020 election, that alters kind of how people operate, how elections are run, all these sorts of things, i.e. some kind of an event where the existing administration says, listen, we are currently at war. We don't know where this ends. You cannot change the horse in midstream right now. That's the one thing that really worries me. And what you just said about him, does he wait or does he do it now while he still has the chance to be at some level of success? That really, really worries me. How realistic do you think that is?
Oh, you're concerned about us not changing administrations, or about them going?
Exactly. What I'm worried about is, let's say Xi Jinping hits Taiwan, and now all of a sudden the Biden administration says, we got an election in 3 months. There's no way we can do this and deal with them with a new administration. And then, it feels like the natural inclination for the population would be keep where we are right now. You can't change while this has already happened or is happening. I mean, is that a realistic thing in your mind?
Well, you remember that Franklin D. Roosevelt, when he ran in 1940, one of the things he said is you don't change horses midstream. And so with the world in turmoil at that point in time, the problem here that I think from the Biden administration, and why I don't think that the Roosevelt example plays, is that it's far, far too easy for the candidate of the right to say that it's the Biden administration that walked us in the middle of this frickin'
Mm.
stream to begin with. And the reason why we're got a torrent of everything coming down around us is because of Afghanistan, the border, Russia and
Right.
Ukraine, and now this thing. This has been a situation that was created by, this is how I think the Republicans would say it. This is a situation that's been created. It's been invited
Yeah.
by the Biden administration policies. And there was no war under Trump. This is what I think the Trump people would say is there was no war under Trump for 4 years. Don't you want to return to a guy who knew how to keep the peace? I think that becomes a perfectly legitimate. And the point here is, despite everything that everyone says about President Trump, about, January 6th and sort of his personality and this whole bit, we actually do have 4 years of recorded service, both good and bad, that we can look back on. It's not like he is an unknown quantity. He is a known quantity in the Oval Office. And especially if he brings in a team of people like Pompeo and Ratcliffe and O'Brien to be there to back him up. These are all people that are on the record, and we understand them as well. So again, I've been a heavy critic of President Trump. I wanted to look at someone else who could serve 8 years, vice versa. I have some concerns with his policies with regard to Ukraine, that I feel like we need to be supporting Ukraine. But at the same time, right now, it looks like he's the nominee, a presumptive nominee of the Republican Party. And so I think he's got a strong record to run on for the next 4 years.
Yeah. Now, would it be, and again, now we're just kind of talking, politics here, but it seems to me one thing that he could be doing is, kind of, well, I guess maybe I'm thinking out loud here, is why not start to tell people, hey, if I become president, this is what we're going to do. But you can't really do that in hypothetical.
Yeah, in fact, if you've read, and I'm sure you have, his books about art of the deal and so on. Trump will make statements like, "I'll negotiate the end of the Ukraine war in my first 24 hours," but he won't tell you how or why or what the deal that he will make, because he needs to hold those cards close to his chest so he can play the right cards at the right moment in the right order. So if you're a master deal maker and you view yourself as that, then you won't expect him to show his cards early, or for that matter, even signal. One of the things I've heard a lot of people recommend that Trump start naming his vice president and his cabinet early as a means of signaling stability. I'm going to bring in real good people. Trump, I don't see Trump ever doing that, because Trump wants to maintain his maneuver space. He is a tactician and a strategist. He wants maneuver space in the near term and in the long term. And if he starts naming people, that just creates vulnerabilities for him down the road. Let's say I name tomorrow, and I'll just pick somebody out of thin air. I'm going to name Tom Cotton to be my vice presidential pick. Okay. Now, what happens if something goes wrong with Tom Cotton in the next 6 months, or the next 3 months until the Republican convention in July? So Trump wants to maintain his options, and that's what I see in his personality, from having read his business, history, personal history. I see that he makes decisions when he has to make them, but not any earlier than that.
Gotcha. These next 6 months are going to be crazy. Getting back to the shipping lanes, the Red Sea in particular. We just heard a couple of days ago that they sunk I don't remember what flagged ship it was, but they sunk a cargo ship. The Houthis did. I think just a couple of days ago, we had the first actual casualties from one of those attacks, a couple of fatalities, one of those civilian crews. So obviously there are still ships that are using the Red Sea to transit, through the Suez Canal, or has the canal basically shut down?
No, there are still some ships, but let's just say it's 1 in 10 of what there used to be. We've seen major shipping lines like Maersk and some of the other large lines have made a cost risk analysis and said better for us to go around the horn or Cape of Good Hope, and so they're taking that route, or they're just kind of rejiggering their entire route structure right now to just avoid the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. But you're right. We've seen that ship sunk, which is really amazing. During Desert Storm, one of my roles in the Navy was to fly surveillance missions in the Red Sea every day, because if you remember way back when, Jordan was on Saddam Hussein's side. And so the port of Aqaba was a place where goods could be brought into Jordan and then could be transferred into Iraq. And so we were setting up sanctions over Jordan, and we were monitoring all shipping to try and pick up anybody that was trying to carry goods into Jordan that were intended for Iraq. There are so many wrecks in the Red Sea, and the Red Sea is so shallow. So I saw a picture the other day of this British ship that went down. Okay, this ship is only 50 feet underneath the water. You can see it visibly from the air as you fly over it. It turned over and it's just down there. And we will be maneuvering around that ship for the next 3 centuries, having to ship ships around there, because it's so shallow now that we have to, and it's right in the middle of a major shipping lane. And so we're going to have to maneuver around that wreck, until we either destroy the wreck. And by the way, there's got to be 50, 60 wrecks at the bottom of the Red Sea. You can fly over them, seeing any given day. It's pretty amazing to see it.
I had no idea it was that shallow. That's unbelievable. So the naval attacks against the Houthis that are currently taking place, is the Navy operating in the Red Sea, or are they kind of at the mouth of the Red Sea and then flying the missions into the Houthi territory?
Oh, we are in the Red Sea. We are in the Gulf of Aden. We are stretched all the way around. There are destroyers and allied frigates up and down the Red Sea. So we've got an air defense envelope that stretches up and down through the Red Sea. And I got to tell you, I'm really proud of our allies and partners. Great Britain the United Kingdom is in there with their frigates, and they're shooting stuff down. I believe the Italians, with one of their Frem class frigates, very similar to what we're about to buy for the U.S. Navy. An Italian Frem got a shoot down of a drone this last week. So, and we're seeing the French have had a shoot down. So everyone's getting involved in this, and we're really coordinating well across the allies and partners. And this is, people are getting, I don't want to make light of this. We're getting some of the best training of our adult lives right now with what's going on in the Red Sea with regard to defense. Now, what really frustrates me, is that we were all taught coming up through the Navy, shoot the archer, not the arrow. Okay. We know who the archer is here. And by the way, it's not the Houthis. They're just the trigger man. All right. They're being backed by the Iranians. And until you bring the pain home to the Iranians, until we go after the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or go against Iranian Navy targets, or go against port infrastructure in Iran, and they actually feel this pain at home, they're not going to stop. Well, and when I say they're not going to stop, they're going to not stop supplying the Houthis. Right. Now, the Houthis, they're just crazy. Okay. They want to die and get to their virgins and be in heaven. All right. They are not responding to what we call conventional deterrence threats. Okay. We can go in there and blow them up, and they're going to have other people come in and pull the trigger tomorrow. All right. You got to get at the Iranians and make the Iranians feel the pain.
Yeah. I wrote this to you a couple of days ago when we were kind of doing our show prep. I feel like this is exactly like the late 90s when Clinton would get on the news and say, we just fired 20 Tomahawk cruise missiles into the desert, where Al Qaeda has their training bases, and nothing happened because a year later, 9/11 happened. So I agree with you. It feels like we're pushing a puddle off of a pool deck and not doing even a very good job of that, because the Houthis still have the ability to operate, because like you said, one guy goes down, another one takes over, and they're still using the same gear that the Iranians are giving them.
There was 3 things.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Let me just finish up on this. So it was 3 incidents that occurred in the 1990s, and I think this is important and instructive. because I think it's the world forgets this about Americans. Okay, 3 times we got attacked by terrorist activities in the 1990s. We got the World Trade Center was attacked, but it didn't come down the
Yep.
first time. Then Khobar Towers in the middle of Saudi Arabia got taken out. We lost a number of troops at that point in time, and the USS Cole got hit in port while it was refueling in Aden. And then, Clinton hit, killed a bunch of camels in the middle of the desert with some tomahawks. And then 9/11 happened. Okay. Now, when 9/11 happened, we surprised everybody in the world, including, bin Laden. Okay, bin Laden was not expecting we were going to come back like that. See, there's this aspect of the American psyche, which is you can poke me and poke me and poke me, and I will ignore you, and I'll roll over, and I'll let it happen, and you can poke me, and then you're going to poke me one more time, and then I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come at you,
Yeah.
and I'm going to be angry, and you're not going to get me to stop, and you're going to be backing away, going, "Whoa, whoa, what are you doing? What was different about the last poke than the previous 17 pokes I gave you?" And it's this
Yeah.
aspect of the American psyche that we call the Jacksonian impulse, which is the nature of our sense of honor. And there's just this barrier that when you penetrate that barrier, when you go just a little bit too far, we're going to get really angry. And by the way, we're going to kind of lose our mind for a period of time.
Yeah.
And we're going to go like
Yeah.
crazy, and we're going to beat things up and break stuff. And then we'll calm down, and then we'll get bored, and we'll lose interest in this. I mean, I'm still frustrated that we pulled out of some of the strategic positions in the Middle East that we
Yeah.
fought so hard for and we lost so many lives over, including Afghanistan and aspects of Iraq. But I'm a strategist, and I'm a long-term guy, and I knew people that we lost over there, and I don't want it to see it kind of go away. But the fact is the American people have this spasmodic reaction to certain things. And right now we're getting poked because they think that they can get away with it. But I do
Right.
know that there's a part of the American psyche that you're going to poke us one too many times, and you're going to be really upset by the way we come back at you.
And I tell you what, I really hope that's the case, because if our leader personifies the American population, I don't get that. I'm not confident in that at all. But I know that when push comes to shove, and I still know several guys that are in the military that when the time comes to really get serious, we can. I just hope, I hope we don't lose that, and I hope another potential 4 years of our current administration doesn't even whittle that mentality down even further. I know I promised to keep this within a certain time period, and I certainly appreciate your all the time today. Let's finish by kind of circling back to the article. Kind of give me where does this go? What do you see the future looks like for commercial shipping lanes, and the U.S.'s sort of influence in all of that? Where do you see us in the next, 5 years from now?
What I'm hoping is that we take the impulse that we saw with the CHIPS Act, the idea of reshoring microchip manufacturing here in the United States, that we will understand as a nation that reindustrialization, rebuilding the defense industrial base within the United States, having the ability to build things like ships here, make steel here in the United States,
Yeah.
be autarkic, be dependent upon ourselves, that we will understand the threat that is in the world, that what this dependency upon China and Chinese suppliers would mean to us in the long term, and that we bring it home and we rebuild our country, that we find this moment to rebuild our country. What I fear is that it will take a Pearl Harbor-like moment for us to fully come to grips with that. I'm hopeful that, the Schumer-Young CHIPS Act could be a pattern for us to follow, but I'm concerned that we won't do it in a big scale. But I think if we can rebuild our commercial fleet, we can rebuild our Navy, and we can get back to work as a nation and understand that the ocean is our lifelines to the world and that we are a maritime nation again. I just don't know if we'll get that absent a major crisis.
Okay. Well, like we started off, I knew this was going to be a sobering conversation, but it's one that we have to have. We need to look at what's going on in the world with a realistic viewpoint of what is happening, what could happen, and what we need to do to right the ship. So, Jerry, I really appreciate the time. It was great to talk to you again.
It was great to be here, and thanks once again. Hopefully, it won't be so long the next time.
Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. Hey, I'm going to finish off like I always do. If you're in the military, police departments, fire departments, or first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe. Jerry Hendrix, once again, thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, guys, this is the Rain Man. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, Observations on the World We Live In. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.